Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. It's Tony Robbins here with you again. Listen, I'm very excited about today, and it's a little bit out of the box. Today, I'm going to introduce you to some researchers. Now, that may not sound sexy, but it's damn sexy when you start to see the impact of what they're doing. It's some of the most important work that I've read about or known about, and these researchers from Stanford are on the cutting edge of all this. So hold on your seats and change your frame of mind and saying, wow, I can learn some things today on where the world is going that could change my longevity, but also my quality of life, my ability to avoid disease and to make a difference in my life. And we're going to be talking to the direct sources. But they're all from the Snyder Lab of Genetics at Stanford University School of Medicine. The Snyder Lab is one of the top genetic laboratories literally in the world. A lot of people hear genetics and hopefully have them address this as well, and they think genetics is destiny, but think of your genes, or the genes being like the light bulb, and epigenetics being the trigger or the light switch. And so there are things you can do to affect that epigenetic side that affect the way, whether genes turn on or off, and the outcome is not just genetics. But these people more than understand this, and they can articulate better than I do. So let's get started. The people who we're with here are first Dr. Michael Snyder. He's one of the best kept secrets at Stanford. He is the chair of the Department of Genetics, first of all. He's the director at the Center for Genomics and Personalized Medicine at Stanford University. He's got a PhD from Caltech. And what I really love about him is his goal is to fix the broken aspects of the healthcare system by employing scalable, affordable solutions that can really predict and prevent disease. And he's the founder of January AI, which I want to ask you at the end, Mike, which analyzes your blood sugar so you can learn which foods to avoid. So unbelievable human being. Mike, thank you for being here. Dr. Snyder, we'll call you Mike by your request.
That's great to be here.
Thank you very much. Next is Dr. Arielle Gantz. She is a PhD in molecular nutrition from Cornell University with a focus on chemistry, biochemistry, and her postdoctoral fellow at the Snyder Lab there at Stanford. Her current ongoing research includes the School of Work by Byron Katie. Many of you know Byron Katie's a dear friend of mine. We work together and synergize, and she's really studying the biology of depression, the depression recovery, the effectiveness of practices for happiness and for health and well-being. And she specializes in transformational wellness practices that really help people explore how they can improve depression, get over anxiety or stress, increase their well-being. It's really precision health, I think, is what she's really looking for. And what I love about Dr. Gantz is she's really looking for non-drug interventions to see if she can find them that are equal or more effective. And then we have researcher Benjamin Rolnick, and Ben is the director of healthcare at the Innovation Lab at Stanford. His mission is to fix the broken healthcare system and bridge the gap between tech and medicine. And over the next 5 years, he's determined to make precision healthcare an affordable reality, which would be extraordinary. And he's a researcher at the Snyder Lab, and he's the co-author of the study that was done on Date with Destiny. They did a study on Date with Destiny in 2019. They followed up with the people afterwards, and the impact was pretty extraordinary. And so we'll be asking about that. And then finally, we have another incredible researcher, Dr. Jacob Wilson. He partnered with Dr. Gantz on another study. It was on the Unleash the Power Within weekend program that we do, but had a little bit different focus. It wasn't so much about depression, but it's really about your ability to learn something, experience it, retain it, and then use it and actually have the retention last. And they really wanted to do a study that was unique. So first of all, Dr. Jake Wilson, he's the CEO of Applied Science and Performance Institute. I've been there. It's a 21,000 square foot elite performance center for physiology laboratory in Tampa, Florida. Some of the greatest athletes in the world go there to get measured, to see how they can improve. And I'm into anything that's going to make me stronger, better, and more so I can serve more. But he's also produced over 300 peer-reviewed publications. He's got numerous investigator awards. He's focused his research on cellular, molecular, and whole body changes which impact health, human performance, and human longevity. He's also got several patents, including recently developed technology on distinguishing between biological age and chronological age. You're a heavy hitter, brother, and you're such a young man. When I first met you, I was like, I can't believe you've all accomplished this. Very much like Arielle, Dr. Gantz. It's amazing, the youth and the energy of what you guys have gotten done. So, Dr. Snyder, I consider myself to be so much of a biohacker, Mike, so I have a hyperbaric oxygen machine at my home here. I have cryotherapy. I have every tool you can imagine. But I got to say, Mike dwarfs me. He measures 2 million items a day in his body. I mean, he tracks 2 million data points on himself every day. and you're probably the most profiled biological human in history. So I want to know, what are the new aspects of health that we can measure today that weren't possible 10 or 20 years ago? What do they mean for health and longevity? And what actionable insights have you gotten from your research that can put people back in charge of their own responsibility, kind of be the CEO of their own health?
Yeah, well, as you point out, we really want to transform sick care into healthcare. The medical system is broken at so many different levels, and we're in a whole new world where you can collect data at a level that's never been possible before. We can sequence people's DNA and predict their genetic risk for disease. We can make millions of measurements off molecules in people's blood and urine and even their poop, their microbiome, as it's called, which is very, very important for your health. And then the wearable subject that you touched upon is a whole new revolution that collects tons of measurements on you each and every day. And of course, I wear 4 smartwatches. You can probably.
Oh my God! I got a Whoop that I wear. I'm not in your category.
Yeah, I saw you had a watch that only tells time. That's almost worthless by today's standards, Tony. So anyway, the bottom line is we can collect data at a level that's never been possible before, which means we can be constantly monitoring your health. And so we do this with all these different technologies. We'll sequence people's DNA to predict risk for disease. We'll make these molecular measurements on people's blood and urine, as I say, microbiome every 3 months while they're healthy, and try and see things that might be wrong. And then we use the wearables. And no one technology finds problems with you, but together they can all be very, very helpful. So with the study we just ran, we followed 109 people for, well, we've been tracking me for 11 years, and you point out we have 2 petabytes of data. I don't know if you know what a petabyte is. It's huge. So we have a lot of data around me, but we have a lot of data around all 109 people we've been following. And believe it or not, 49 of these folks learned something very, very important about their health from this profiling we've been doing. For example, we caught someone with early lymphoma, to be with pre-cancers, to be with serious heart issues, all before they were symptomatic. So by doing these deep data profiles on people, we're getting a much, much better picture of what their health state looks like. And most important, we're profiling them while they're healthy. So what happens is when they transition, when something goes off, you can actually see it very, very early.
Wow. And can you give us a taste? 2 million bits of data. What are the types of things that you're measuring every day? Can you give us a little flavor?
Well, that's from the wearable data. So that will be from the smartwatches where you follow heart rate variability, respiration, blood oxygen, temperature, things like that. But we also do things that are a little unusual, like we'll measure all the things you're breathing in this, what we call an exposometer.
But what are some of the actionable things that people could use that could help them to guide them at this stage?
Yeah, well, right off the bat, you can tell when you get an infectious disease from a smartwatch. Wow. And then, as you might imagine, when the pandemic hit in March of last year, we ramped this up big time. Let's build a whole infrastructure to be able to follow millions of people. In principle, we can follow.
I saw that study you did. It's pretty amazing where you're able to extract, it looks like here, vital signs and understand before people starting to have a COVID signs what they were likely to have it by those changes. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So what happens is their heart rate goes up. And so you can pick that up with a smartwatch. And in fact, it turns out for the first folks we picked up, it was basically 10 days before they had symptoms. Wow. It turns out it's a median of 4 days. So 4 days before people are symptomatic, we can tell on average with this heart rate jump up.
How big a jump was it?
Well, it's only an average of 7 beats per minute, but because you're making so many measurements on people every single moment, all day long, it's a very easy thing to pick up. And for some folks, it's as little as 2 beats per minute. So wow. You can, again, they're just subtle differences, but when you're measuring people all the time, you catch it. It's a strong signal. And so again, we can alert people. We've now built an alerting system that actually sets off a red alert when their heart rate jumps up. And it can be due to COVID, it can be due to other respiratory viruses, and it can be due to other stresses as well. So right now we haven't teased out the difference between, psychological stress yet versus a COVID infection. We're still working on that. That's how we want to improve the algorithms.
We're really entering an amazing world, and you're the pioneer is this, Mike, because your organization, your team there at Stanford is leading the way. And now people are starting to take that and try to create products and services from it that can actually change our health. So we salute you and thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, no, that's what we're trying to do. The research is trying to do this, figure out how big data can better manage people's health, all different kinds. And then to be honest, we spin off companies, things like QBio and January AI are exactly in the space trying to basically then scale this out to more and more people. So
It's an exciting time. Well, thank you. I'm going to come back to you as well, but let's talk to Dr. Ariel Gantz. And Dr. Gantz, first of all, I really love your focus personally, because to me, health and well-being are the basis and starting of health. I think, the mind-body effect cannot be separated. And I know your work is even more precise than that. That's what I love about your work. It seems like your work is really about investing in how to change the psychological variables to alter the molecular level. So my question is, could you share with us a little bit of the biochemical and molecular changes that you've seen through your research, how the mind and body work together and how you're measuring them?
Yeah, sure. So I guess maybe to give a little bit of context around how I started getting into this space. So Ben and I met at like a wellness retreat called the School for the Work of Byron Katie. And we met at that retreat when I was trying to figure out what to research for my postdoctoral work. And I knew I wanted it to be something in this area because it's so important to me. And so Ben had suggested, well, I think that if you send people here, this is the treatment for depression. And he had written out this entire, actually like multi-page proposal on doing, this randomized controlled trial, looking at the School for the Work as a treatment for depression. And so I had just started my postdoc with Mike. And so I basically said like, wow, like this is amazing, because what about if we could apply all of the multi-omics, and that's like this very deep biological profiling, looking at, millions of data points. What if we could apply that to looking at mental health? And I think that that's interesting in and of itself, but even more interesting is what if we could apply that to see how physical health is improving as mental health improves. So that's kind of what we started doing. And then we, spoke to a lot of different researchers, because it's not like such a novel concept, right? Like we already know that mind is connected to our body. I don't think our work necessarily is the work that's showing the mind-body connection, because it's just so well established. Like, we know that if you watch porn or if you watch a comedy or, there are all these different things that you can do where you're just watching something and your state of mind changes and then your body changes. Or, if you're in fear, you have this fight or flight response that drives physiological changes. And these are really known pathways. And so what's really interesting to me about what we're doing that I think is also being done in other areas as well, like with meditation, is okay, but if you improve mental health and if you improve your frame and perspective, then how does your body and your health improve at a molecular level?
Listen, Ben, I've gotten to know you pretty well over time because you've done a lot of this work. I want to know, I know you work here, obviously, Dr. Snyder, the Snyder Lab, but you're also director of healthcare at the Innovation Lab. Can you tell us a bit more about the mission of the lab, maybe to start with?
I'm a traditional Hollywood guy, a Hollywood talent manager. And, what I found, and Tony, you know this better than anyone, is that you have some of these people who are the richest, most successful, most famous people in the world, but they're miserably depressed and they end up committing suicide. And, it made me really wonder growing up, well, what is important in life? And what I found was that, money, fame, those things people value really highly, but ultimately health is our most valuable and our most important asset. And so, within that, mental health was something that I found to be, kind of one of the most important, kind of assets that we have. So we could be physically healthy, but if we're miserable and we're suffering, then our quality of life is low. And what's the point of living? Yeah. So, that sort of is the genesis of this work between Ariel and I, and, kind of Mike, really being the pioneering mind to support it and to expand it and to accelerate it. But you actually play a large part in that story, at least in terms of, my experience, because you did that UPW at USC campus. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm very grateful. I got to go to that. And
yeah, it was fun. We had about 10,000 people in that in the stadium there. That was awesome.
That's right. And you literally did a fire walk on McCarthy Quad, in like the middle of USC. And, I sort of looked at this as a pragmatist, and I thought to myself, well, look, like there's got to be something interesting to investigate here. If we're trying to address this crazy crisis in the world, where literally life expectancy in the US has went down year over year, and this was published in the BMJ about 2018, and a large part of it relates to these behavioral health issues, overdoses, addiction, et cetera. Suicides, et cetera. The second largest cause of death for adolescents.
Yeah.
We have basically 30 million people in therapy, like 1 in 6 people on psychiatric drugs, et cetera. But clearly something isn't working, So the question is, well, what does work? Why does it work? And who does it work for? And, having experienced your work, a lot of people report anecdotal stories around, like changes in their mood and their depression, in their lives and their quality of life, et cetera. But when I did a literature search, there were literally 0 studies on your work and what was done and its efficacy. And personally, I thought that was a huge missed opportunity. The last thing that I'll say is that when you think about mental health as a problem, like this is like a disease like depression is one that's literally measured and diagnosed by, sometimes 9 questions on a sheet of paper, so ADHD, which you're prescribed amphetamines, it's, they ask you questions like, I oftentimes have a messy desk, or, I find it hard to finish things that I complete. This isn't hyper rigorous blood testing here. So,
So it's really, it's the precision mental health care as well as precision healthcare, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think mental health just has been very underexplored, as both Ariel and Ben have said in this space. People haven't gone into this in the detail that's needed to truly understand what's going on and possibly come up with novel ways of intervening. I love the things you're doing, but I also think there's probably a myriad of other things that can be explored as well.
Yes.
So I think that's the goal: get a better understanding by getting a much deeper view of this. And then maybe we can get away from simple questionnaires too, which is a lot. Again, to me, that's very soft science, so to speak. Get something a little more firm so we can make more precise diagnoses and then ideally treat people better according to their particular condition.
I'd like to talk to you guys about the study that you're publishing here. A 6-day immersive training program improves depression and well-being, a randomized control study. So it came out of this research. Benjamin, I guess I get it now. You kind of started this because you just went to the event and you got curious, and then you found people interested in studying it, and you approached our organization and put it together. So I'm grateful you did the study. So there was one done at the UPW in a different area related to learning, but this one was more on depression and well-being. And so maybe I'll come back to you, Ben, just for a second. What was your experience, your own direct experience of going through that date with Destiny?
I use some of the tools that you teach actually every day in my life. The concept of physiology, language, and focus, actually right before this, Ariel and I were joking around, in my opinion, explains so much of this, kind of what we like to think of as a salutogenic paradigm of healthcare and medicine, which just essentially means that you have your baseline. Pathology is what, drops you below your baseline. And this salutogenic medicine is factors that take you above and beyond your baseline: health, happiness, well-being, et cetera.
Yeah.
And, I think that factors around mindset and belief restructuring, and Ariel can speak more about the research that we've done both with you and Byron Katie and elsewhere around this, but it seems like there is something mechanistic going on between, believing something and these downstream physiological pathways, where a lot of traditional psychiatry or psychological research has characterized the pathways. Like, for example, George Slavich's work at UCLA with the, kind of social threat or social stressor transduction signal of depression, something along those lines. I kind of butchered it, but, it characterizes essentially this, kind of how basically social stress enters into the skin, into inflammatory gene expression. But we all had a basic question, which was, is there anything inherent about the stressor itself? Or is it rather your belief, your perception, or your mindset around that stressor that's eliciting this pathway downstream? Because the difference is so consequential to treatment, therapy, or paradigms, et cetera. And I mean, I can say pretty clearly from our research so far that my own experience, I'll just speak to my own experience, that the mindset piece shuts off all of these downstream, inflammatory gene expression cascades. So when I don't believe, my boss is mad at me anymore, then, and my boss gets mad at me, I'm a little bit less threatened to pose a creative idea, to try something, to fail, etc. And I live less stressed and more peacefully.
Yeah. And it has a biochemical effect. It's like I always say, beliefs create and beliefs destroy. They shift us completely because it's a sense of certainty in the body. And I believe, and science is now showing it, that sense of certainty gets downstream to the actual biochemistry of the body as a whole. So Dr. Gantz, Ariel, tell me what were some of the highlights of this study? It's a 6-day immersive training we did. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's called Date with Destiny. And you were really studying depression and well-being in a randomized control trial. Can you explain a little bit about how you set it up and then a little bit about what you learned?
Yeah. Okay. So we had just done this study on the School for the Work of Byron Katie, and Ben and I are both just incredibly passionate about these non-pharmaceutical approaches to mental health. And in my own life, I'm also particularly passionate about it. Because when I was younger, I was, very emotional child, and my parents responded to that by taking me to all the best therapists and psychiatrists. And I got put on a lot of drugs that are now not legal to give to children, or, not approved to give to children in some cases.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm just so passionate about, having, basically the issue is that current clinical care, you have only 30% of people respond to the first drug that's tried for depression. You have actually over 40 drugs that are approved for major depressive disorder, and there's no real clear clinical guidelines around treatment selection. And so really it turns out that some of it is really guess and check. And I want to be kind to psychiatry and psychiatrists here, of course, because I think that they do a great job and they help so many people. But there's a huge rate of misdiagnosis between, bipolar disorder and major depressive disorder alone. There's a 14% rate of misdiagnosis. And then there's the fact, again, that, these drugs are not working for most people, especially the first time.
Like you just said, I want to point that out because, the way a statistic is shared changes meaning for people, right? So it only works 30% of the time for people. The drug means it doesn't work 70% of the time, right? And that's the piece that we miss somehow in the element. And part of it is trying to reinforce people that are committed to helping. But what I love about you is you're looking at the facts, and the facts say, boy, we got to look at something. There's got to be a better way than 70% failure, and with side effects, as we both know as well. And then changing from one to the other. That's what I love about what you're doing and Mike's doing, all of you are doing, is also maybe even figuring out if you do a drug approach and the work Mike's done, you could figure out perhaps which one really would work instead of this trial and error experience and side effects that you're talking about. I didn't mean to interject, but I really want to just send my respect to you because most people have been through what you've been through, just pretty much accept it. There must be a strength inside of you to say, I'm getting off all this stuff, because once you go biochemically down that line, it's really hard to break that line. If I may interject before you tell me about the study, what made you do that? What made you break from that approach, being put on you?
Yeah, well, in my case, and I want to say, I so appreciate my parents for taking this approach, and my mom's a doctor. And so, she just wanted to get me the very best care, and I really appreciate it. But for me, it was I just always knew inside myself that there wasn't something wrong with me. And so I just didn't understand why I had to take these drugs that really changed my personality and gave me all these terrible side effects that I really didn't like. And I just felt my autonomy was being taken away. And I felt like my freedom of choice was being taken away. And yeah, it was just really hard for me. So for me, I guess. And
as you said, all with nothing but the purest of intent. I mean, every mother, I'm sure your mother wants you, every mother wants to live or die for their child. I'm a father of 5, I understand. But we all are doing the best we can without the kind of data that you're now bringing to the table. So your work is, really going to free a lot of children, hopefully, and maybe some adults too. I just really honor you for it. I think it's fantastic that you stuck to your guns and you had your own internal certainty, and maybe some of the side effects helped that. But you had to make a tough choice, because once someone's biochemically in that pattern, it's very hard to get out. I didn't mean to interrupt. You were talking about you originally did the studies on the work, and then you kind of had a format of what you were looking for. And then we went to Date with Destiny, and a little bit of how you designed it and a little bit of what did we learn from it.
if you look at adults, about 40 to 60% of people eventually respond to treatment. So 30%, the first treatment. But if you keep trying for like a year and, try different approaches with all these side effects, eventually 40 to 60% of people respond to drugs, antidepressant drugs.
And when you say respond, does that mean they're 100% free depression, 50% free depression? What's the measurement when they give that statistic out of curiosity?
About 50%. So there's a 50% reduction in symptoms. Yeah. So this is not people are going from like depressed to super happy. They're going from depressed to less depressed. Although again, of course, that's on average. And in the Snyder Lab,
some people respond more or less than others. I understand.
So okay. So we did this randomized controlled trial, which is incredible because that's the best study design. And we had 45 people that were randomized to two groups. So half of them went to Date with Destiny for 6 days. And then half of them did gratitude journaling for 1 month and have an active control. And so we chose gratitude journaling because it's something that has been shown to be effective, but you can't control for every aspect. If you want to do a perfect study, you'd have to have a million controls, but ultimately you have to decide which is the control that's relevant here. And so we felt that, especially for your work, one thing that we had heard from psychologists is like, well, it's all positive mindset or, whatever. So we felt that we wanted to show it's not just about having a positive mindset. It's actually something beyond that. And I think what had caused me to be really interested, we had these 45 people, half went to Date with Destiny, half did gratitude journaling. And I'll note that we, recruited for this study among people that were both depressed and not depressed. And so half of our study population started with depression and half of them started without depression. And so among the individuals that started depressed, we actually saw that 100% of those individuals at the 1 month follow-up time point were no longer depressed. They were in remission.
No drugs, no side effects. Just a week of their life, 6 days of their life, 100%. I saw that. I was so thrilled, especially a month later, of course. But it's not new to me because I've been doing this for 43 years, but it's still pretty cool to see that kind of measured effect using the rigorous approach that you guys have had. What else did you learn?
If you take 10 people or 100 people, okay, then of those 10 people, if you give them drugs, only 4 of them are going to respond.
And you're going to say drugs, we're talking about anti-anxiety, antidepressant drugs.
Exactly right. Or if you had 100 people, only 40 would respond, which is pretty much just almost very similar to a placebo.
Yeah.
Okay, now think about this for a second, okay? Because this blows your mind. I want people to understand this. If you had 100 people who went to Date with Destiny, 100 of them would respond, okay? That means 100% of the people who went to Date with Destiny improved, right? So these are unheard of numbers.
I know in your business, there's another way of measuring effects. I think they call it effect size, right? And I understand 0.8 is considered to be a large effect size. Meta studies on drugs and depression, I think, show it as, if I remember right, it's 0.3. What was ours? Are my numbers correct? Can you explain effect size? And what is, the meta studies have shown about drugs versus drug approach versus what ours did from Date with Destiny?
And effect size, like statisticians like to use these numbers because they're complex, but they take into effect the effect that we have and our variation. Okay, well, what does that mean? Basically, some days I'm in a good mood, some days I'm in a bad mood. I have normal variation. Well, an effect size takes into account my normal variation along with the change I saw that day.
Okay.
So basically, if you look, there's a scale, 0.2, 0.3 effect size we think is small, okay?
So 0.2, 0.3.
Yeah, that's small. Drugs fall into 0.3. We would consider that small. So anything that could be moderate, any effect I could see that would be moderate, 0.5, like if you were telling me I would go a Date with Destiny and you were to get, say, 100% of people improved, which is what we saw, and the effect size was 0.5, I would say this is absolutely incredible, right? We're actually getting a moderate effect.
Yeah.
When you say 0.8 and above, now we're talking about a high effect size. Yeah. Okay. So if you saw that, that'd be like, I would be blown away. Basically, Date with Destiny showed an effect size of 1.85. So
versus
blown away.
versus 0.3 or 0.3. That's exciting. That's extraordinary because there's no drug that's ever done that. And there's no therapy and drug combination that's ever done that. That's pretty amazing. Okay, so it has the effect size, but you say 100% improve, but how much? Like you guys studied people that came, people don't come because they're depressed. They come for all kinds of reasons. But you found half the group that was depressed and half the group was different. On the depressed group, how much right after the event and what percent were still depressed, a month later?
Right. Well, basically a month later, no one was depressed. Right. So that was a huge part. And then
you shared with me when you first called me, when you guys were so excited about the results, that they went back and reviewed every person in the data because they just couldn't even believe it, right?
Well, and this is the one thing I'm going to say, that working with those guys from Stanford that I'm very impressed with.
Yes.
So we had these statistics run by, probably 4 or 5 independent statisticians who are all blinded.
Yes.
Okay. From different laboratories.
Yes.
So these stats were run by multiple different people, multiple different ways, the strictest stats you can imagine. And all of them kept showing the same thing, all done in a blinded fashion.
Wow.
So like, again, the effects were huge. And Tony, it wasn't just like depression, it was anxiety. Anxiety decreased by 80%, right? Over 80%.
That's amazing. And what about a month later?
It actually went up more. It was over 80% a month later, right? And
well, you know why that is, right? We mentioned it earlier. It's because what makes us feel the way we feel are our beliefs and values. And when you shift those, you shift what things mean, you shift what you feel, and that shifts the way you live your life, But you guys have measured it biochemically as well as experientially. And that's the part that's pretty exciting out of this. Wow. For, one of the biggest issues people deal with in life, I don't care how successful you are, is stress. What happened to the stress numbers after Date with Destiny for people?
Yeah. So talking about stress, right? Everyone's stressed, especially during these times that we're in. Basically, we saw a 67% decrease in stress, right? And on top of that, we're hit with negative emotions all the time. I remember when I was in grad school on psychology, one of my great professors goes up on the board and he had the students go up on the board and say, write emotions. And they would go up and write emotions and then just whatever emotion you feel. And I'm telling you, Tony, like 8 out of the 10 emotions were anger, stress, anxiety. All of these were negative emotions. Maybe 2 out of 10 were positive. And he goes, what do you guys see? The majority of the emotions you're talking about are negative.
And that's because we have with a survival mechanism in our brain, right? If we get into survival, it's always looking for what can hurt us, what can happen. And so it produces more of those. And unless we learn the tools that we teach, which then changes your focus, changes the meaning. And now you have choices of new emotions, right?
100% right, Tony. And the thing is, so we saw an overall negative emotion of 75% decline after a month after the event. So these are long-lasting changes, right? So
what about positive emotions? The negatives are going down. Did you? Right. I think you guys measured positive as well, didn't you? What happened? Was there?
We did. So positive emotion went up 55%, while negative emotion went down 75%. So that's simultaneous change, right? So that's people are shifting. Yeah, they're shifting. Like they're focusing more on positivity. You know what I mean? And moving away from negative thoughts.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so glad you guys did this study because I see this, obviously with the people, and I hear it my whole life. Every day people come up. I went 10 years ago and this is how my life has still changed. It's extraordinary that most people who hear it on the surface would say, what do? You're pumped up for a few days or a week or a month or something. Your life doesn't really change. And so now you're scientifically showing all of these impacts, biochemically, emotionally, and experientially, where most people today know if you don't keep improving, you're not going to have the competitive advantage. But I think there's a lot of people, Ben, you talked about this before, and Dr. Gantz, you talked about it as well, is the stigma of, that stuff doesn't work, it's all BS, they don't even look at it.
So these numbers have never been seen before by drugs or psychotherapy. And so when basically Dr. Gantz, when she ran the statistics originally, she said, listen, we need to be sure of this. So she had them run again. And then she said, we need to be sure again. So he had them run again by another independent researcher, all of which were blinded, right? Yeah. So like the rigor, and my hat's off to her. I've never seen someone take such rigor really in my academic career as Ariel.
Wow. Ariel, I can't thank you enough, because people, when they hear results like this, of course, they're going to think, oh, it wasn't a really good study. It wasn't really fair. And I know Stanford wouldn't have put their signature on if it wasn't, but your willingness to do all that extra work. I mean, you guys started this in 2019, so you've really worked at it. I really want to thank you. It's extraordinary. I understand this Unleashed Power Within study has been accepted by the Journal of Physiology and Behavior. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, Physiology and Behavior.
Could you share with our audience a little bit about how you measured the body and some of the statistics or pieces that you discovered that are mind-boggling?
Yeah. So yeah, just like you said, just some backdrop. I've been doing research on human performance for a long time, and not just in like science across lifespan, but had the opportunity to study really the top 1%, really the top 1% of the 1%. And
Yeah.
I've been very blessed to do that. So you see a lot of interesting things when you get to measure people like this, whether, and I'm talking about NHL, people who are MVPs of Major League Baseball, Stanley Cup champions, the best football players, monsters, people who aren't human. You don't understand what they're doing. And so we had a chance to measure you. And if you think about it, really, like if you think about it, at your size, 270 pounds, you're kind of built like a superhero, but we got to measure you in action. And I think when you look at what Ben and Ariel discussed, looking at the changes, the long-term change you have, a lot of that stems from the presenter, okay? Because they're seeing changes in you and your physiology, and that's impacting their changes in physiology. So the first step when we did research was actually researching you and what happened with you.
Yes.
So on the first day that we measured, we had sensors all over you. We were taking saliva.
Got a team of like 7, 8 people all there measuring me on computers in real time and putting things all over my body. It was.
We
and
did.
I'm supposed to still do my work, right? It was pretty.
We
I
did.
had a strap across my chest.
Exactly. The same like measures we're using on the Stanley Cup champions, same stuff we're looking at you. And, and basically what we found is that you, just to put in comparison, in a single day at a UPW event, you're expending more calories. It's equivalent to running 2.5 marathons.
Yeah.
Right. Or we've measured, for example, like, again, if you look at NHL players at a single game, more like, 10 full games straight, and, burning over just in an event, over 10,000 calories. And we're not talking about outside of the event, at rest, during the event, burning over 10,000 calories, jumping over 1,000 times. What I can tell you is that the blood lactate levels, you look at lactate threshold, and lactate threshold, you guys know when you're exercising, blood lactate levels go up to, we call lactate threshold about 4 millimoles. It's a measure of blood lactate. So we say when people hit that threshold, they also hit something called ventilatory threshold, which means that they have a hard time talking. Okay. So you're jogging with your friend, you hit a hill, you start breathing fast, you can't talk anymore. That's ventilatory threshold. That's when you hit lactate threshold. That's 4 millimoles. We saw you at some points push your body so hard that you were 16, 18 millimoles. And so,
I'm still talking.
And you're still talking and you're still motivating people, and I think what most people don't really understand is that to get these outcomes, the extreme levels that you're pushing yourself, people would be in the hospital, and legitimately people would be in the hospital to push themselves to these extremes.
Especially after 4 days of it or 7 days of it, like that's just one day to give everybody perspective. Like the first day you measured me, it was 11,300 calories that I burned. It was like, holy cow. And I certainly didn't take those in, right?
Yeah, insane. So, and again, the point is that, and we've tried to like compare this to other physiology measures, and it's a whole nother level. So
you told me something interesting though, that I want to mention, that chess players who aren't jumping, running, doing any things I'm doing, talking, they're silent. Just the mental power they were burning, was it 4,000 calories? Is that what you told me?
Yeah. Chess players are burning a tremendous amount of calories. And so I think one of the things, and that's actually one of the interesting things, a lot of it is the mental output. So actually the highest output that we got from you on calorie expenditure was at Date with Destiny. And it was actually at the event with this study that was done. We measure your date with destiny, and you actually expended more calories there than UPW. And the interesting thing is that your physical output was higher at the UPW event, which, but
I jumped, what he means is I jumped more, I went more and run around a stadium versus, with, 20, 15,000 people versus here's a group that I've got that's 5,000 people and they're already trained a little bit. So I don't have to physically put out as much, but my processing power of each person getting up and doing intervention is much higher. And so I end up burning more calories. It's crazy. I couldn't believe it.
So it shows the impact of the mind, right, on physiology. So many things that we've learned, just by studying you in general, and the impact that you're having on people. Like, I believe that the output that you're having is having a huge impact on people, and that's what we've heard, like, during this interview. And so our first study that we did was the UPW looking at learning.
So let's talk about that. One of the things, my theory is people understand mirror neurons. If you're watching somebody who's, paddling a boat, if you've got strong mirror neuron connection, you internally are doing that as well. And I think also the more compassion you have, I don't know, that's my belief system. I don't know if it's scientifically accurate, but I think it makes you want to make that connection, or maybe just I got really strong mirror neurons. But the point of the matter is you can feel what they're feeling in your body. And your studies have shown that what I do to my body, they experience as well, and that changes their ability to learn. So what did you learn from the study that stood out to you? And then I'd like to ask Ariel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things is we're looking at long-term learning. And I think us being, Ben, Ariel, myself, coming from a university background, we've sat through a lot of lectures, I'm sure, that are just not fun, And so my master's degree is in psychology and motor learning. And so I've always been interested in learning, the concept of learning. How do you enhance it? What are the different variables? And so one thing is that what we looked at is how you impacted the subject's physiology, how that altered their state, and how that changed long-term, really behavioral tendencies, capacity, learning. So what we saw was, number one, is we see that during these events, their physiology is mirroring you. So, when you're going through meditation, their physiology is coming down with yours, because we're measuring you guys both at the same time. When you're actually doing state elevation sessions, their physiology is mimicking you. So they're mirroring your physiology during the event. Their state also is changing during the event.
Their biochemistry.
Their biochemistry is changing. Their focus is changing. Their energy is changing. Their well-being is changing. And so we took your lecture material, which is long and extensive, and, and we put that more of in a university setting. We took the same lecture material and we had a more of a traditional lecture format. So same material, same long hours, and which would be traditional lecture format. So we compared the long-term, obviously the physiological state didn't change in that situation.
Right.
We didn't get elevation of physiology, biochemistry didn't change. It was more stagnant. And so what we
two groups. So I understand you took one group and you said, we're going to take the exact same content. Correct. And we're going to have a teacher teach it in a traditional way, in a traditional classroom. And then you compare it to the people in the style that I'm designed, my system, which is to change their biochemistry and physiology radically while they're learning. And what did you start to notice?
Well, we know.
By the way, they tested all these people so everyone understands their biochemistry. They're doing their saliva. Same things they're doing to me, they were doing to them so they could see what was going in the people in the audience.
Absolutely correct. So what we saw was obviously radical transformation in physiology. This, Tony, is opposite of what we see in traditional lecture format. When you go into a traditional lecture, you see students start to fall asleep. And so what you're doing is we're conditioning elevated state. Like Ariel said, we're conditioning a state that is above normal, that is moving to peak performance. And then long-term, what we saw is the UPW event not only increased performance on exam scores immediately after the event compared to traditional lecture, but when you came back a month later, the traditional lecture, while they learned, like traditional lectures do, they declined in performance after a month. And the UPW group, not only were they elevated, they retained everything that they learned. So they had these permanent radical transformations. And what I thought was the most interesting was this, that their need states were altered. Okay, so
explain what that means to people, because if they're not familiar with my work, they wouldn't understand.
Yeah, so basically we have need states that are more spiritual, right? Like for example, growth, contribution, okay? And then, you have more like, carnal type of need states. Think about like, obviously you talk about this, but people are driven by significance, okay? So meaning that it's about me. So these things where people are interested in social status and I'm better than everyone else in the room, okay? Well, the problem with that is that you can't control that all the time.
Yeah.
You can't control that. And so it drives, what happens? Anxiety goes up, right? Because what if someone else is in the room and they're better than me, I can't control that.
Yeah.
So it's out of my control. What we saw, and it doesn't foster teamwork. So what we saw basically is that people shifted more toward growth and contribution and decreases in things like basically significance. And so they were more in a state where like, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to contribute to people who are around me. And when that's your focus, anxiety lowers, right? So we saw these changes in learning. A lot of the questions that were basically on the exam were about like, how do you cope with stress? How do you change your outlook on things? Yes. So they were able to retain a lot of these key. So, kind of mechanistically, the concepts, the principles that change long-term behavior, that change long-term depression, they retained at a much higher rate.
Oh,
and
cool.
so it really shows.
And how much higher? Can you give us a sample of a measurement of how different it was between them and their retention percentage?
Oh yeah, like you're talking about like probably double the exam scores. By the end of their exam scores improved like 300%. And then the control group improved about 88%. Right. So good, strong lecturing. They were in depth, but
content was valuable to them, but use of it doesn't last, right?
Correct. Right. So, and if you look at
how much of a role does the biochemical change that I'm creating in them by the use of my movement and music and the way I use my voice and the interactions we do in terms of elevating testosterone, can you share with people a little bit of why that creates a retention and what measurements did you discover?
Well, it's interesting because it's almost like the fluctuations in hormones, I think, occur when they're needed. Okay. So for example, a lot of times people think cortisol is a bad thing. It depends on when it's happening. Like if you're doing a lot of jumping, cortisol might temporarily raise, and that's going to make you basically have some long-term retention. For example, think about 9/11. Everyone remembers what happened then. No one knows what happened on 9/9.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that's that cortisol response. So when we see you do these, when you're pushing them, we'll see these short-term elevations. Okay. But the interesting thing is how you change your biochemistry at certain times. So you push them. Well, there's a concept known as the testosterone to cortisol ratio. And in a lot of our research that we do, we will actually look at that as a signature for success. So we'll compare like professional soccer players, and it's almost like when they know they're going to win, the ratio between testosterone to cortisol goes up. It shifts upward. It's almost like when that shift occurs, it's almost like a prediction of winning, a prediction of achievement.
It's an important performance enhancer. You have an explosive power within you, and you use more of who you are, right? That's in essence what happens in sports, and that's really what's happening in their learning experience.
Exactly. So what we basically saw was when you're pushing them, obviously cortisol is going to be elevated. What people don't understand is that you're pushing yourself, you're pushing the audience to become better. But what we saw is you bring it to this level that they've never been to before. And then you use meditation strategies
to bring them back.
You bring them back. And at the end of the meditation, their testosterone to cortisol ratio skyrockets. Yeah.
but they're in a
Well-
comfortable state, right? So it isn't all just push, because then people would just burn out. That's that rhythm that I've developed in teaching. I did specifically so I could highlight and bring in the power of that emotion, just like learning 9/11, so you never forget it, but then drop you down out of that, fight or flight mechanism into a beautiful state where you're enjoying it. So you're pulled to use it, but you're not stuck there. That's the essence of what I try to do, is one of my fundamental training principles.
And that's
And
exactly
it's really
what we do.
training instead of teaching. That's the distinction of what we do. It's like training a muscle. You can know what to do, or you can train the muscle so it does it when you leave, a month from now. That's really the essence of what we do different in these events.
Well, and that's the big thing. I think that's huge here. Okay. So we talk about you change your beliefs, you change your state, right? Or your physiology, your state, your beliefs, and it alters your biochemistry. So we talked about this basically with Unleash the Power Within. But the biggest thing I didn't talk about was the actual numbers. When you had people post meditation, their testosterone to cortisol ratio increased 139%. Right?
What does that mean to people so they understand?
So basically, the basic thing I want everyone to understand is that testosterone, we think, is a very positive thing. It gets you focused, it gets you amped. It's a feeling of achievement. So we take a ratio between testosterone, which is an achievement-oriented hormone, over
Meaning it'll get you to take action. It'll get you to follow through.
correct.
It'll get you through your fears, right?
Correct. It's that superhuman feeling.
Yeah.
It's that I'm standing on top of the mountain.
Yeah.
I've done tons of research with the most elite athletes in the world. And we looked when they're going to win before that event, that testosterone to cortisol ratio rises. So when we see that go up, we think of it as a biochemical signature for achievement.
Yeah.
So basically we saw 139% increase in this biochemical marker of achievement, and it drives people into action. And that causes radical changes, not just after the event, but over time.
Yeah.
And so that's what was really exciting.
That happened at Unleash the Power Within, just the weekend itself, not even the
Just the weekend event, let alone when you talk about Date with Destiny, which is an entire week, right? So we see the effects go up and up and up with that duration.
Maybe you can share with us what you learned by measuring at a digital event, meaning an online event, because our events are not like passive, right? They're active still. What did you learn there?
Well, absolutely. Well, first off, I mean, the technology of the event's like nothing I've ever seen. Yeah, I've seen a lot of cool technology out there.
Yeah, it's pretty
But
amazing.
it's like I walked into the room as a scientist, you know what I mean? Sometimes you try to remain non-emotional in a sense, but sometimes you get overtaken. And when you walk into this event, it's like you're literally speaking to the whole world. You have this 360 screen, and I've never seen anything like it. Just people interacting with you all around the world. And what we did was we took wearables and actually had them all around the United States.
Yeah.
And even like in Puerto Rico. And so we had subjects wearing these sensors, and we had you wearing the same thing they were wearing.
Yeah.
And it was exciting because we saw the same mirroring of physiology that we saw in person virtually.
Yeah.
And it was incredible because they're mirroring your physiology virtually. And who would have thought that would have occurred?
Not even me.
Yeah.
I believe it could be done, but I didn't think it'd be able to do the same level, but we were able to. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. And very similar to what we saw with Date with Destiny, depression went down, anxiety went down.
Yeah.
Basically focus on achievement in the future, relationships, all of these amazing things. That loneliness went down, people were more confident.
Yeah.
People were not stuck in the past, and they were focused on the future.
Yeah.
They were changing their outlook on life. And this was from a virtual event that, by the way, in the peak of the pandemic. And we looked a month later and they were going up.
Yeah.
Right?
In the
They were
pandemic. That's
improving.
right. I forgot about that. That's right.
Right. This is when people were locked down, and the majority of the world were locked down and in fear of their lives.
Yeah.
And the worst pandemic, at least that I've ever experienced in my life, we saw improvements.
Yeah.
We saw a mirroring of you virtually. So, and from just some interesting, like just notes that subjects were writing down, we let them kind of write down notes and everything.
Yeah.
A lot of them were, just saying like, I've never experienced anything like this in my life. This is, this is life changing. People, a month later, their notes were like, I'm now going to pursue the job that I'm now going to pursue this business that I never thought I had the confidence to pursue.
Yeah.
So, but again, statistically wild changes that were just incredible. And, like nothing I've ever seen.
I knew we could have an impact. But, in people's homes, not having the group dynamic, not having the music normally, doing it through a screen, even though we built, 20-foot high, 50-foot wide screens, and I put all this new technology and could call on people and see them. I did everything I knew how to do, but I wanted to know also. I mean, I knew we'd make a difference, but I didn't know statistically. So share with people what you learned. Is mind-boggling when you shared this with me.
Some people commented that they actually got a more intimate experience, but the biggest thing is that they were getting the same biochemical changes, the same mirroring of your physiology. So we wanted to see, well, how did that impact everything else? Everything we measured at baseline, from after the event to 30 days after the event, robustly improved. I mean, like huge changes, right? Confidence went up, right? Inner strength went up, right? Energy skyrocketed, it soared. People weren't as lonely. Their relationships improved. Everything that we saw in our past studies, anxiety was down, was all improved. And this was, by the way, Tony, at the worst part of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what we want to look at, and what I'm telling everyone now, no one knows about this because we literally just measured this and got this data.
Are you going to publish this data as another follow-up study then?
We are going to publish this as another follow-up study.
Great.
And this is amazing. What we did was we wanted to look, we measured 11 months after. And the reason why we did this is because instead of 12 is because things are about to open up.
Yeah.
We wanted to sample people still in the middle of this pandemic.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we said, how long lasting is this? And the thing is, me personally, as someone who's a physiologist, I understand. Let's take exercise, for example. If someone were to exercise for a week, they might feel good for a week after that, maybe 2 weeks after that. But if they don't do anything after that, a year later, they're going to be out of shape. They're going to feel awful. And they're going to go, oh, I need to change my life again. Right? Things don't have these long-term effects like that. So we wanted to see, not only does this have long-term effects, but during the worst disaster really of our lifetime. And Tony, what we saw, and I'm going to share just like 3 of the results here visually for you. But what we saw, Tony, was incredible. Like, first off, let's think about this. During a storm, what's going to happen to inner peace? Inner peace should go down, right? Yeah. When you don't know what's happening in your life and you don't know, am I going to keep my job? What should happen to stress? It should skyrocket.
Yeah. Right? And it did during the pandemic, right? We know, people's suicides went through the roof, drug abuse went through the roof and so forth. Loneliness went through the roof. I mean, there's plenty of studies that show what the average American went through. It's why I wanted to do these events, is to find a way to empower people in the middle of this insanity.
Exactly. And again, going to loneliness, we're not connected with people like we used to be. Loneliness should skyrocket. So with all these, external stimuli hitting people, we should see the opposite of things happen. We see loneliness increasing, all these variables. What we saw was astounding. Every variable we measured at baseline was improved. And I'm talking about like 30 to 50% improvements a year, almost a year after this event. And in fact, what I'm going to do, because we're going to publish this, so I can't share everything, but what I am going to do is I'm going to share a few of the results here.
Thank you.
So let's just start with a few. I'm just going to show you 3 items, graphically, and then I'll talk about the other ones. I can't show everything because we're going to be publishing this. But let's start with perceived stress, right? Think about it. People are out of a job, right? They don't know if they're going to keep their job. Loved ones, they're not sure if they're actually going to get impacted by the actual virus. So perceived stress should skyrocket. Instead, we see a robust drop in perceived stress in the middle of a pandemic that lasts almost a year after the event. It's still a permanent change, right? This is absolutely something that we would never expect to happen.
That's incredible.
But if you think about this also, Tony, with perceived stress, that's one thing. What causes perceived stress also is that we're not as connected to other people.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at research, psychology research, a lot of research I've done is with Ryan and DC's work, and they talk about human needs, and one of the human needs being connectedness, right? Well, during a pandemic, you're not as connected. So loneliness should go up.
And
we
did,
see
right?
the opposite.
Studies of the general population went through the roof.
The population went through the roof. And this study, almost a year after the event, there's a permanent change. People don't feel, they're not as lonely anymore. During the middle of a pandemic, they're not as lonely anymore. So this is the opposite of what we would expect to find, right?
Not by a little, not by 5 or 10%. What is that, 30, 40%? What's
you're talking about 30, 40% in each of these. Wow. So this is massive, right? And actually, it's interesting. We had some people keep journals, and I sent you some of the journaling, right? But interesting enough, listen to this. This is amazing. If someone loses their job, it's obviously one of the worst things that you could ever happen to you. We want to feed our families. This is important to us. People who are in this study, they were journaling that happened to, they started their own business.
Wow.
And are thriving. So you're talking about, they turned something that would be a stress into going, no, now's my opportunity to do something I've always wanted to do. Yeah. So it shows that when you change your values, when you change your core, when you change what you're focusing on, you can become empowered. Your belief system, things can change. And that is where this is the third thing I want to show, which I think is huge. People are disempowered during a pandemic. They lose control. They've lost control, which, by the way, is, again, one of the things you talk about Ryan and DC's research. People don't have control. They want to have control. It's a human need. So around the globe, people are feeling disempowered. What I'm showing you in this next graph is people's empowerment went up drastically, right? So a year into this pandemic, people are more empowered. You know, and again, going back to something, Tony, what do we know? Listen, I've been doing research almost 20 years, right? I published almost 300 papers, right? Across psychology, physiology, and most of my research is on interventions.
Yes.
I've never seen anything like this,
that's
ever.
Great.
Right? So this is something that's mind-blowing. It's something that we don't see, but it's something really special, you know? So it's absolutely incredible. And I'm not going to show all these other things, but I will tell you other things that increased. Inner peace went up. How is inner peace going to go up in the middle of a storm?
Yeah.
You know, you saw things like energy increased. People were more confident, Tony, after this event. Anxiety went down.
I mean, a year later, they were more confident 30 days later, but also a year later, right? 11 months later?
Correct. They were more confident. Okay. Anxiety, there's a good researcher, his name's Reiner Martin, and he suggests that anxiety is uncertainty times importance. How much more uncertain can things get right now? And people have less anxiety, right? So all of these things that equations would predict would be going the opposite way, right?
Yes.
It's not happening. People were less angry. Their life satisfaction increased. They were more excited about the future. Their inner strength went up. They had overall greater well-being, right? They were happier, right? So these are amazing things. And I think the biggest point is it shows, and you know, it's really just amazing what happened is that you were able to impact people virtually. What we found in our publications live, we're able to see virtually. Wow. So this means that people, you know, they're able to come to events, change their lives, but people who can't virtually are making tremendous biochemical, physiology changes, and it's causing radical permanent changes in their behavior. So really an amazing study.
I can't thank you guys enough for even wanting to do the study in the first place. You know, when this first came down, it makes me emotional. You know, it's like, it's my mission to help people. And, you know, it's when all of a sudden what you've been doing your whole life for 40 plus years is made illegal. Like it was illegal if it was more than 10 people. You know, that was, I mean, it was crazy. It went way beyond anything business-wise because I've been made to do this. I thought this is when people need me the most. And, you know, I've told you all the things, you know, the things we try to do, move to Vegas, you know, rent a friend's mega church, and they shut down the churches. I couldn't believe it. But so I knew we could make a difference, but to know that we can make this much of a difference, not only, you know, in their life right then, which would be enough to give them that opening to start to change their life, but see them improving in virtually every category almost a year later in still the middle of a pandemic. That's pretty exciting. I can't thank you enough, because a lot of people's thought is, oh, it's some pump up, you know, it lasts a few days or a week and you're back to normal. You know, you'd already shown the month and you already shown live, but to show this even digitally, virtually a year later in these environments, it's just amazingly fulfilling. You mentioned, like, you sent me a quote when you sent me the stats. I don't know if you have it there. Maybe you could, if you've got it, maybe you could pull it up and read it, because it touched my heart. It's just an example of how much people changed in the middle of a pandemic. Do you have that one that you sent us over?
Here it is. My life has been miraculous, right? Since the virtual UPW. Me and my husband stopped drinking alcohol, a vice I thought we were doomed with for life. Our depression and dark cloud lifted with all the work Tony and his team have put in. We have shifted, and I think this is the biggest thing you talk about in your seminars, is shift that occurs.
Yeah.
We have shifted our lives and businesses to the next level. I was able to conceive a baby we wanted, and when we saw Tony and Sage baby, we knew we can create the lives we want at any time.
Wow.
I no longer have anger as the underlying emotion to my life's mission. Wow. And so many other blessings since UPW Virtual 2020. Like, wow. and this is a statement, guys. You see graphs. Graphs are one thing. That's great that you have graphs. Everything you see in here outlines a graph. What do you see here? Anger is less. Yeah. Shift in focus. Shift in core values and beliefs. That's what you're seeing in this quote, and that's what you're seeing. But that brings to me the graphs alive.
Yes, that's really cool. I really appreciate you sharing this. This is awesome. So let me ask you, what is, out of all these things, what stood out most for you, for each of you? What stands out as being significant that you want people to know about so that they have new choices?
So I think it's that people should take charge of their own health at all levels, just like you're describing. And I think we're in a world where that's very, very doable. And I think people really have this new opportunity. It's a very, very different world. Yeah. And I think we can really use it for the betterment of each of us at our own individual level. So I would say everyone should take charge of their health. And yes, be open to the new methods and new technologies for doing so.
Ariel, tell me what stood out for you in this study? What was interesting to you? What do you want people to know about in this area so that they, you know, again, it's all about choices, right? What are the choices that we can make that can give us a more impactful change in our biochemistry and our health and our emotions and our behavior? What stands out for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me in the context of our biochemistry and our emotions and our behavior. And it's also really interesting to me just in the context of learning and education. I think as Jacob was speaking to, you know, we have currently most lectures are just like a boring format where you're seated in a chair, you're not moving, and then, you know, the teacher is speaking to you. And I think especially as a kid, like, I mean, I guess basically this study is kind of good news for recess because it indicates that
I can't recess in the middle of the program. That's great.
I mean, I think future studies could look into, okay, what if you take some of these concepts and apply them in traditional like classrooms and, you know, education where you're having kids actually like jump up and down in the middle of math class. And I wonder how that would bode for, you know, ADHD and prescribing stimulants. So I think it's really interesting to think about kind of the follow-up studies that could be done here, extending what you're doing into classrooms.
Well, I would love to do that. So if you want to do that, because we work, you know, we do kids camps and programs and we see the same impact. I use the same principles. And I feel for teachers because kids today, because they have access to whatever they want the minute they want it, I mean, they can search Google and get the answer before the teacher tells them something. So the way in which we teach today is not consistent with the way in which the tempo in which we're able to get answers. But there's a difference between answers and wisdom. And when it's in your body, it's like mastery. You know, you can know something and not do it. But if you get it in your body, then you're going to find yourself physically wanting to do it, emotionally wanting to do it, right? It becomes something that where habits come from. They don't just come from repetition. That's one way, but they come from emotional impact, as you well know, because that biochemical impact is what I'm going for. That's why when people hear, oh, I'm going to go on an event for for 4 days for a weekend, 3.5 days, or I'm going to go for 6 days a day with Destiny. Oh my God, I can never sit that. Well, you're never going to sit that long. And you're going to have this incredible ride of not only emotion, but transformation and learning that can last. I mean, that's really the piece.
One thing that's really interesting to me is about how a lot of healthcare, and especially mental health care, is about pathologizing people. Like, okay, you have this problem, so let's bring you back to baseline. But that's not how reality is. Like, in reality, it's just a spectrum of wellness. And first of all, my goal personally, and I know that from what I've seen of your work, it doesn't seem like your goal. My goal is not to be like brought back to normal. Like, I want to be thriving. I want to be optimal.
It's not making people okay. It's making their life extraordinary by them taking control of the factors they can control. Because we all know there's things you can't control in life. There's lots we can't control. But the more you focus on what you can control, the more overwhelmed you are, the more depressed you are, the more anxiety you have. And the more you focus on the things you really can control and see they affect all the way down to your biochemistry. And that's the beauty of what you and Mike and all of you, Ben, are doing. To me, that's the real goal, an extraordinary quality of life for you and for your family, because you've learned to be the CEO of your own mental, emotional, and physical health.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that it's just such a false dichotomy to say, like, these people have mental health issues and these people don't. No, we're all in a place where we can learn and grow and try and, make decisions to improve our outlook and perspective and the way that we see the world and how kind we are to ourselves and to others. And we can also make choices to improve our happiness and our health, whether that's, trying to exercise more. By the way, exercise is, like the literature shows, as effective for depression as drugs for mild depression, or, sleeping, drinking more water, whether we're making choices about changing our self-compassion or our choices in the world. I just feel like we all have the ability to make choices to lean towards optimizing and thriving rather than like satisfying.
Yeah. And Ben, how about you? What would your summary be of what you want people to take from this?
I think we always need to be exploring with an open mind. And this is something that I've actually learned a lot, from Mike, is that the method of science from, the Popperian style is falsification, right? It's not going in with a dogma and an expectation up front. It's to explore and to find out from the data what's actually there. And, I think that the whole reason why we're talking to you is because, there are pioneering scientists like Mike out there who are willing to, open up new dimensions to look where no one else is looking. And, oftentimes that's where the gold is.
Yeah. Listen, if you decide you ever want to do, and you're a busy bunch, but if you want to do something in the traditional teaching environment, where I'll be happy to participate with you in any kind of test you want to do or share, because I want to get these principles out. I don't want to just be me that's doing them. And, Byron Katie does an incredible job in a different style, but she uses one of the tools I use. If you watch what I use, most of what I use to shift someone is I don't tell them, I ask them. What a question does, when you question something, if you really question it, you produce doubt. When you produce doubt, you shake the legs of certainty, and now there's an option for something new. I mean, that's the essence of what Byron Katie does. She and I have a similar technique, different styles, and some different focuses on values and belief structures, but we're so aligned in those things. It's one of the reasons I have so much love and respect for her, and I know you guys have benefited from her as well and done studies on her as well.
Similarly to what Ben was saying, I think it's really interesting, especially when we think about, in the area of mental health. Like you said, there are, hundreds of millions of people that are suffering, and the current treatments in clinics don't work very well, and they certainly don't work for most people. And so when we think about, our results with both, the study of Date with Destiny, this 6-day retreat, and also this 9-day inquiry-based stress reduction retreat, which is the work of Byron Katie. When we think about, like, okay, these are really working and they don't have side effects, over 90% of people are, recovering in just a few days, and they have lasting recovery and remission. I think then the question is, like, okay, well, how can you scale this on a massive scale? And so I think that virtual reality is going to be a big part of that solution, both in terms of, like, actually FDA approved digital therapeutics, as well as, I think, again, therapeutics kind of imply, like, going from a pathology to, like, back to normal or okay, as well as for taking people and just moving them to thriving, whether it's FDA approved or not.
Yeah,
it's so true. And, I think one thing to speak to just on a personal level here is really the stigma factor that we get to overcome through research. Because, there are so many people that I speak to, especially in academia or clinical practice, and, they'll hear, a name like yours, Tony Robbins, and they'll immediately default to, oh, that's bullshit. There's no way that this could actually help people. It's snake oil. And meanwhile, a belief is a poor substitute for an experience, right? They're not actually going in the building and experiencing this and playing full out and trying it. And, the truth is that there is, something on the buffet here that, could potentially help somebody transform their life and give them their life back. I think that in a lot of ways, I found my life back through, these types of practices that would never be, sanctioned in the academy and clinically, and yet they work, but they were never investigated. So, I think what you've done, Tony, is, you've invented a lot of practices and you've curated a lot of fantastic practices, but you've taken it from the perspective of what works pragmatically versus going with any type of school or dogma or theoretical structure. And to me, that orientation towards results is what we need right now. One of the really important points here, especially looking at our other work as well, is that there could be a relationship here between essentially like learning and enhanced learning, and then essentially these mindset transformations that lead to downstream improvements in, kind of gratitude and, kind of depression, stress, anxiety, et cetera, where in this immersive environment that you lead, essentially more learning takes place, and then essentially people's beliefs change, and those changes are solidified in a rapid and accelerated fashion.
Yes.
I'm really cognizant to the fact that, like Ben said, I think there's a big aspect of overcoming stigma here. And I think I actually thought, Ben, you meant that in a different way, like overcoming stigma of seeking help, which I also think it overcomes, because again, when you're not saying like these people have a problem and these people are fine, when you say instead like, everyone has different areas, we all suffer. And I think that that's really apparent, especially now during COVID. I think Project Healthy Minds did a survey of people during COVID, and 97% of people that they surveyed 1,000 people, 97% said they experienced some form of anxiety during COVID. And so I think that it's really clear that it's not like some people have mental health issues and some people are fine. We're all suffering. And so in that way, I think it breaks the stigma, in that way, to be focused instead of on improving people's health. But then you actually said that you actually use the stigma thing a little bit differently, speaking about the stigma of like these wellness-based methods, oh, they don't work, or, that's not medicine. And so I'm really cognizant as to how we can make sure that we do things really, really carefully in terms of doing these studies, so that, people won't just say like, oh, well, your control group was blah, 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 so we won't even read the rest of the study, right? Because this is going to be, it's going to be like one of the most effective, if not the most effective improvements in depression published. Anyway, so where I was going with this,
and that's gigantic, and because of that, people look at it with an eye of, oh, it's BS. But I think that's what's so nice about the designs that you guys done. You were really rigorous in your designs, and it's also why it's useful that Stanford did this as well, because it just has a different level of credibility. The design, the execution, and Stanford together, I think, will open some eyes, and therefore some people will see it. I also want you to know my focus has always been produce the results and let people, I know why, to the best of my ability, my psychological understanding, maybe not full physiological understanding, but also my focus is, what do you want? What do you want to improve, as opposed to you're broken, you need to be fixed? My core, message, if the title of the documentary they made on me is, I'm not your guru. Because I'm not here because you're broken and need to be fixed and I have the answers. I'm here because I've made all these mistakes and I've learned, and I just want to save you some time. And if you want to go to the next level, that's what this is. And I think when you talk next level, the stigma kind of disappears. But the stigma you're talking about within the community of intellectuals or the community of academia, I think the fact that you've done this is courageous because, no matter what you do, it's like, I think it was Aristotle said, say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. That's how you avoid criticism, right? It's like, you have to have some courage. I mean, you guys have had courage in doing this, but I think it's your courage, Dr. Snyder's courage, Stanford's, willingness to stand behind this that will hopefully open some new doors.
That's what we hope. I mean, what we hope is that more researchers enter into this area and enter into this domain and produce more research investigating it, and not just doing the same studies, over and over and over again on the same small population of interventions. It's like, okay, great. We understand the efficacy of those things, but there's a whole buffet of options out there that no one's really explored. And then there were so many deeper questions that we're excited to, answer around your work too, Tony, around, kind of which elements of, these events are most significant. Is it the immersion? Is it priming? Can people just do like a small priming exercise and, get maximal benefit? And, that's what I'm saying, is that it's totally underexplored territory from a scientific perspective, but from your results-based perspective, you already know, you've seen millions of people change their lives,
44 years of data from, 100 million people, right? So it's pretty certain for me, but your point is right. There are elements. I'll tell you my philosophy. I love it if you want to research any of those things. Very much the same as all of you believe in Dr. Snyder. It's personalized medicine, but I'm doing personalized medicine for a mass number of people. So I'm putting different pieces in, like David Essamy, a perfect example. There, you've both been there. I don't know if you remember towards the end, one of the cherries on top exercise I do is, I call it the 3D process, where you go back to your earliest memory, right? So it's hypnotic technique. I'm taking you back, and then I'm getting you to create or remember an even earlier memory and have a new meaning that affects your whole life. For some people, that one exercise is the most powerful thing of the whole 6 days. That one exercise changes it all. For someone else, it's changing their value from, acceptance to boldness, right? Or courage. So the reason I do what I do the way I do is because I know that everybody's personal. I know that I can't know their individual genome. Now, when they stand up, I know the equivalent of their genome. I do. I can read them like a book in a few minutes. Once I know their need structures, I find a few of their values, rules, and belief structures, what their goals are. I know what their problems are going to be. I know what their opportunities are going to be to a certain extent. And that's why I'm able, with precision, to do what I do in such a short time. And we all think everybody's supposed to be the same. And what I love about what you guys are doing in medicine and now in psychology and psychiatry is we're just starting to open up. No, everybody's unique. Not we're just going to label them and drug them, or we're just going to label them and put them through some therapy of asking them about their past. We're gonna see, what do you need based on where you are and where you want to go.
And imagine what happens if we see stage development in individuals who go through this type of work and go through like the kind of work that you do. You don't,
as opposed to I'm clinically depressed, as opposed to I'm going from stage 1 to stage 2, and I have uncertainty right now. And so it's questioning my whole world, and I'm feeling freaked out, It's like language is so powerful in creating changes in biochemistry, as we all know.
I mean, I think, Tony, the more that we can do in investigating your work and investigating, the people that come to your work and how the specific techniques that you utilize can be, effective or non-effective for the treatment of both mental health disorders and physical health disorders, I think is just a straight gold mine for, innovation and discovery right now. It's sort of like the unexplored abyss.
I agree. What are you most excited about? It's probably hard to say because you're doing so much.
I'm excited about all of it. I'm excited about the idea that we can get people to take control of their health at an individual level. And it's really going to come down to the individual, because the medical system just doesn't have time to follow you the way you can follow you. They get 15 minutes with you every 2 years while you're healthy. Where the reality is you should be thinking about you, quite a bit, and we'll have systems set up to do that. And even something as simple as a smartwatch could actually be put, believe it or not, on 60% of the planet. 60% of the planet has a smartphone. And if you pair that with a smartwatch, and then you basically have a health device, health tracker for most of the planet, which is pretty incredible for $100 a person.
And now, I just saw New Amsterdam Genomics, and a lot of them do. What cost $500 million is now $200 to get your genome sequence. It's just insane. Right. But what's really interesting that this New Amsterdam Genomics does is, for a doctor, is they show you everything like any genomics test would do. And here's, you've got 2 pairs, 1 pairs, here's where you're at risk, here's what you could do. They give you great suggestions, health suggestions, exercise, diet. But they also say, you shouldn't do warfarin. It's not going to work for you, right? It's part of the beginning of precision health, but precision medicine, I should say. But they also have something else that's really cool. They have an AI now that reads every genetics article every 2 weeks. And from what I understand, if their numbers are accurate, it's almost 2 million a month. And so there's no way and then it sends you directly based on your profile what you should be aware of. You can read the actual article or they give you the summary. So we're really entering an amazing world. And you're the pioneer, is this, Mike, because your organization, your team there at Stanford is leading the way. And now people are starting to take that and try to create products and services from it that can actually change our health. So we salute you and thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, no, that's what we're trying to do. The research is trying to do this, figure out how big data can better manage people's health, all different kinds. And then to be honest, we spin off companies, things like QBio and January AI are exactly in the space trying to basically then scale this out to more and more people. So
but Mike, I want to ask about one of the companies you spun off. It's I believe called January AI, and I guess it analyzes blood sugar so you can learn which foods to eat and avoid. I'd be remiss. I mean, blood sugar massively affects mood. It massively affects biochemistry, inflammation. I mean, it's as important as anything on the earth. Tell us a little bit about what this test does. How do we get it? What's the impact of it, if you don't mind sharing?
no, not at all. So the reality is, as you probably know, 9% of the US population is diabetic, 33% pre-diabetic, and 70% of those will become diabetic.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, that's almost half our country, and it's only getting worse. So it turns out that, the food you eat, food is truly medicine. It's very, very important for you. And most people don't worry about it. They just eat. So there's new technology out there. It's called continuous glucose monitoring. It follows your sugar levels continuously, measures you every 5 minutes. And so for normal people with good glucose control after you eat a meal, and it can be sugary, if you have good glucose control, you make insulin and it takes care of it and your cells respond and absorb it and everything's kept under control. But as you get older, and especially if you're obese and have other health issues, you don't have good control. And that's where the diabetes and prediabetes kicks in. And you can follow this. And you get what's very powerful about this is that different people will spike to different foods. So you might spike to pasta and I might spike to grapes. And so different food sources actually cause differences. And that's probably for a combination of reasons, partly genetics, it's partly your microbiome that we've talked about earlier, different things. We don't fully understand it. But we do know that's the case. That is nearly everybody, by the way, spikes the cornflakes and milk. That's like so nasty for you. Anyway, the point is that different people, and you can see this, and that's the power of this company, January AI, that they actually show you this. You wear these monitors and you can see these spikes and see what foods spike you. And they have this food recommender system. But even more than that, they can do artificial intelligence and predict what foods will spike you. And of course, that will be different from Ben, from Ariel, from me. Wow. So we can actually see this. And so you can make, again, these food recommenders to be able to tell people what they should be doing. And it also teaches you behavioral training. So you probably, we talked about exercise being really important. Well, it is. It's hugely important. I exercise every day.
Yes.
And it turns out, they teach you things like, as part of this, if you eat rice. That'll spike you, by the way. It spikes nearly everyone. And eat rice and take a 15-minute walk after you eat the rice and watch that spike not happen. So simple little things like that. They
as little as 15 minutes, huh, Mike? As little as 15 minutes, if they do something at spikes with a gentle exercise, literally they can drop it that fast?
Oh, easily. And what I don't think we know is what would be right for you. So for you, it might be 10 minutes or maybe 20 minutes. I don't know. And that may differ for me, but this is the kind of thing you can learn from these devices and from this program. So they do need a prescription in the US. So it's done as part of a research study. Yeah. So in Europe, it's over the counter, believe it or not. So you can just go get them. But here you do need a prescription. So it's all built into the study and into the program that January AI runs. Well, it's called January AI because January, the idea, it's the beginning of the year, January. when you would launch, you know, your New Year's
New
resolution.
year, new life, right, brother?
You got it. An AI for the artificial intelligence. Yeah, that's where the name comes from.
Well,
And yeah, it should be, you know, we think it's going to be very, very powerful. It already is. We have a number of people who signed up. So, and again, it's yet a new technology to better take on what's clearly a problem. And what I like about it is we're just trying to, habits is one, but we're also trying to steer you away. You keep eating the food you like. It's hard to steer people away from, but you're making substitutions. Well, maybe you shouldn't eat this and eat that instead. That won't spike your glucose. Simple little thing like that. So this is what the kind of stuff you can learn from these technologies. And this is why they're so powerful.
it's literally, now you're really talking about precision medicine, because as you said, somebody could spike by one thing and the other person not at all. And I've stressed that. I've had people do genetic tests that do show some dietary pieces, but some of those are not locked in. This is precise in real time. I got to do this. I'm going to sign up. I want to get across to people. You don't have to be diabetic. You don't have to be diabetic to do this or worry about it. Just to know the patterns in your own body and what gives you optimum energy would come from this as well. Well, listen, I want to thank. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. So Mike is pretty humble about this, but he's had a number of amazing spin out companies, and like with market cap of billions of dollars. But he has another startup too right now called QBio, and Mike, maybe you want to say a few words about that as well, because it's
they're
also
doing
working on some revolutionary profiling, precision medicine stuff as well.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah, some similar idea, like these deep profiles I talked about in the beginning with molecular profiles, and they do a medical version of that. They do a whole body MRI, and just from the first, over 100 people, they've done many more than that now. Same thing, they caught some with early ovarian cancer, prostate cancer. They even caught some with early pancreatic cancer. In all cases, before symptoms. In pancreatic cancer, basically you never discover early, because by the time you discover it, it's late.
They usually tell you to go home to die. I mean, it's one of the most vicious.
That's right. Yeah. Well, this is the power of profiling people while they're healthy. Again, precision health, we like to call it. Follow people while they're healthy and follow those changes. If you see something shifting that's not right, something's up, and then you can explore further and try and understand what's going wrong. And that's how a lot of these things were caught. And they're also caught because it wasn't just one measurement. It would often be something on the image with some molecular markers. Said, well, something's up here. It's not quite right. Yeah. And so then you dig in deeper and you discover that, yes, there is. It's very, very early. And that's exactly when you want to discover things. If something is going to go off the rails, catch it early before it really does go off the rails. Catch it before symptoms, and that's the power of what we're doing.
Do that. It's usually easy to solve it. I know there's some. So is this a way of interpreting MRI with an AI, or what is the actual function that gets you to this level? I'm just curious.
Well, it's whole body MRI together with some very, very deep molecular testing.
Okay, got the combination.
So it's another big data, if you will, measurement and longitudinal. Those are the two keys: big data and longitudinal. In today's world, here's a very interesting thing you might appreciate. In today's world, if you tell a doctor, I'm going to get a whole body MRI, they'll tell you, absolutely not. You should not do that. It's terrible, because you're going to find nodules. And everybody has nodules, by the way. Women have them in their ovary, men in the prostate, and that's not the point. The point is, are any of them growing? And so what you want MRIs, but you want them longitudinally, and most of the time, and hopefully all the time, none of them are growing. I have nodules. I have a dense spot on my spine, and I know it's not growing because I've done this. But if I walked in the first time when something was wrong and I saw this thing, I might think that's the culprit. But now I would know it's not the culprit because I have it measured and I know it doesn't grow, and it hasn't grown in 3 years. And so that, again, same is true for all of us. That's going to be true. But if one of them starts growing, well, that's the time to intervene and get in there and do something about it. And so, again, the medical profession hasn't quite figured out the power of longitudinal profiling. Just follow it over time. And if it doesn't change, you're good. And if it starts changing, well, then maybe you do have something you got to worry about.
I'm so grateful for the work you guys are doing. I'm so passionate about it. You're doing some of the most important work in medicine right now. I'm not blowing smoke your way. I know you know it, but you're unsung heroes, all of you. And I just can't thank you enough. Thank you for taking so much time. I really appreciate it. You guys have been fantastic. Blessings to all of you, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All the best.